I was born in Warwick, Mass. in 1858. I married my husband William Bradford Gunn in Sunderland, and in 1884 we moved to Southampton and bought the farm on Bedlam Road. He loved the farm in that it had a lot of maple trees for syrup, and it had a small orchard, so we were able to peddle eggs and milk to Holyoke and Springfield. I was also the school teacher and janitor at the number 3 schoolhouse on Bedlam Road, which was diagonal to the farm. Bedlam Road, after I passed, in 1946 was renamed to Pleasant Street in Southampton. So now you know where Bedlam Road is, hence, and the intersection with Gun Road. William Bradford, the Bradford has become a family name of sorts because William's great-grandfather married a great-granddaughter of the first governor of Massachusetts, Governor Bradford, and that has become a family name. I had 4 children. Alice died at age 23, Roland at 26. My 2 sons, Arthur and Clarence, died at an old age and lived to a more advanced adulthood. Now I will become my daughter-in-law, Bernice Skinner, who grew up in Dana, Mass. And Dana, you might go, where's that? Dana is now in the middle of the Quabbin Reservoir. In 1914, I married Clarence Gunn, and I also was a teacher at the Bedlam Road School. The most traumatic part of my life was in 1948 when there was a fire, and the setup was the house, the shed, the barn, everything connected, which made it nice and easy for New England farmers in the winter. But the fire started in the middle of those buildings. My daughter-in-law Ruth was excellent with animals, and she had tamed a dog that had meandered into the farm named Rover. And Rover barked in the middle of the night and woke us all up that we were able to escape without harm. Everything was, the farm and all the buildings were totaled. My daughter Helen taught at the Sheldon Academy, also another teacher in the family, and she taught with Beverly Larrabee and Bertha Pease. Then moved to Holyoke and went on to teach there. I have 4 grandchildren that all became teachers. The stone next to me belonged to an uncle of sorts, and when he died, he was Clara's brother, and when he died, he said, "I'm leaving my money to the missionaries and my body to my family because they will know what to do with it." And this is the gun-clad scarf. Thank you, Candy. All right, so we're going to cut through one last time. Thank you.
My name is Ebenezer Kingsley. Sometimes I use the word ensign in front of my name as a symbol of office or respect. I was born in the territory of Northampton in 1706 and died in 1783. I was married to Mary Dudley Kingsley. She is also buried here. We were blessed with 7 children. The oldest, Ebenezer Jr., fought in the War of Independence and was killed in New York State, unfortunately. This stone memorializes my wife and myself. In 1730, I was living in Northampton, and several of my friends would take rides out to the western part of the territory, and we liked it. It was very, very heavily wooded, and it looked like it might be good farmland. So 30 of us went to the proprietors of the territory of Northampton and suggested that perhaps they could divide some land here for the 30 of us. And they agreed that that would be a good idea, and so they, by lottery, chose 90 acres for each of the 30 of us, some of which was on Pomeroy Mountain, some of them on what was known as Pine Plain, and some of it was here in what is now called Town Plot. So we were each given 90 acres. In exchange for that, we had to promise that within the first year of this deed, we would have to fence in and till 5 acres of the property that was given to us. And also, in addition, within 2 years, we had to promise that we would build a house and move into it. I was the first to do so. And I built a one-room house right across the street, which is still standing today at 181 College Highway, and later expanded that house into what became 4 rooms, and we lived in it all of that time. On occasion, when the winds are proper, and I have the feeling, I waif over there to check out what the current owners might be doing. And so far, I have been pleased with what I have seen. Frankly, I'm very proud to be one of the original settlers of what is now Southampton. During the course of the next 10 years, many families moved into the area. And we found that, of course, the first thing we needed was a meeting house, a place of worship. So what many of us did was we went to the territory of Northampton and we asked the Massachusetts General Court to incorporate this into the 2nd precinct of Northampton, which they agreed to do, and it was called New Hampton. We, the proprietors here, were authorized to collect taxes, to build the meeting house, and to pay a preacher to come in and preach to us. In 1741, I was chosen as moderator of the New Hampton and was chosen to serve on a committee to find that preacher of the gospel. It took 11 years before we were able to raise enough money and build our meeting house. Fear not, we still gave our due to the Lord by having our meetings in individual homes. In 1753, the General Court decided to incorporate New Hampton into Southampton. For many, many years, I continued to actively serve the town. I was a selectman, one of the first selectmen in the town. I was town clerk for more years than I care to remember. Some of my writings are still in Town Hall, if you would care to look and find them. I wrote beautifully. I was also a part-time school teacher now and then, for which I was paid the sum of 10 shillings per day. I was also a blacksmith, actively a blacksmith, and my shop was right here on the property where you are now standing. Thank you very much for visiting with us today. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming. My name is Abdullah Coleman. I was married to Zeno Coleman. Right there. We were a simple family. My husband was a school teacher and went out to Ohio and found me. I was one of his students and came back. But we're not the famous ones here. Unfortunately, our oldest boy, Perry Coleman, is the one that we're here to talk about. In 1861, Abraham Lincoln went and announced that we were headed towards war. And he posed the question to all of our young men out there, shall the Union survive? Unfortunately, my husband and I had raised our children to be good citizens, church-going, and to stand up for what was right. My son was one of the first people in Western Mass and the first in Southampton to sign up to join the Northern Union. He joined the Northampton 10th Regiment, Company C. There was about 82 young men that joined, and they were proud of it. When they arrived in Springfield, they arrived with 2 other companies. There was about 252 of them that marched from the train station to Hamden Park, and they were treated like they were heroes already before they ever saw one minute of battle. And on July 10th in 1861, Governor Andrews went and blessed all the men, sent them home for 2 days before they were sent off to war, and unfortunately, we did not know that would be the last time we saw our son. He unfortunately died in May of 1862 at the Battle of Fair Oaks in Virginia, sometimes known as Seven Pines. It was the 16th bloodiest battle in the Civil War. And unfortunately, Company C from Northampton was dead center that day. It had rained for 2 days before, and they were just outside of Richmond, and those fields were muddy, the trenches were filled with water. 11,000 young men were either injured or died that day at that battle. And unfortunately, like my son survived his initial injury. He was found 65 feet from where he was shot. He had stuffed his own handkerchief in his wound, just below his right ribs, trying to save his own life. But there were so many young men on that battlefield who just lay there waiting for help, and there was no way to get to Elm. Our son was buried down at Fair Oaks, Virginia. And fortunately, Caleb Clapp from Hartford, Connecticut, helped bring our son home about 2.5 weeks later. Perry is the only boy that died on the battlefield whose body made it back here. We had lots of our men who went to the Civil War who came back. Unfortunately, they didn't come back the same. But of the ones that died, Perry's the only one who was returned to us. And the town threw a huge reception when his body came back. There was 2 pastors that were at the Southampton Congregational Church who prayed over our son's body, and 3 volleys of fire were shot over this grave. Unfortunately, this was not what we wanted our son to be remembered for when we had him. He was a carpenter and a joiner, which meant he made like furniture and stuff like that, and he was very successful. And although he is our town hero, we would have rather that he had grown up, got married, gave us grandchildren, like the rest of our children had. So hopefully the next time you're coming through, maybe you'll stop and say hi to my son on your way through. Thank you all for coming.
Good afternoon, neighbors. You may wonder about this place with the cedar tree and the wrought iron fenced-in area. This is where my family, the Chapmans, are buried. Such a fence was quite the status symbol a couple of 100 years ago, usually suggesting a family or a person of great importance to the town of Southampton, and usually somebody that had the financial savings to prove it as well. Actually, there used to be many cemetery lots here with more modest surrounding fences, more like metal piping in a column, a marble or granite column. But over the years, many of these have gone away, probably more for maintenance reasons than anything else. Luckily for me and my family, our fence remained. There are 4 of us Chapmans here. My father, Paul Chapman, who died April 30th, 1856, aged 88. He was a very successful shoemaker in town. My mother, Ruth Chapman, who died May 29th, 1810, at the young age of 34. My father actually lived beyond her for another 46 years, which is pretty amazing. You can't read very well what it says on her stone, but I'll tell you. It says, "Dear friends, adieu. Your grief suppresses, my Savior's will is done, and I am gone to him." And lastly, my little brother, Sardis Chapman, died July 1st, 1803, sadly when he was only 2 years old. And me, well, here I am. I'm Malin P. Chapman. And let me give you some idea of what was happening in the country around the time I was born. In 1803, Thomas Jefferson was the president of the United States, and the country went as far west as the Mississippi River. In Southampton, the first pastor of the church was Jonathan Judd, and he died that year. Shortly around the same time, another 28 people, mostly children, died in Southampton from what you now know as diphtheria. The new minister was chosen, and his name was Vincent Gould, and he actually lived in the house across the street from the cemetery, at the entrance to the cemetery. And during his time here in town, he encouraged many talented young men to study theology. And so, although I had a very short life, it was actually very special because I was part of something called the Flowering. This was a time when nearly 50 young men, not 15, 50 young men in Southampton studied for the ministry at Amherst College, Williams College, and Yale. Many of us went out to serve as ministers throughout New England and the Midwest, and even a couple of us went overseas to Africa to be missionaries there. And one of my good friends, Ebenezer Searle, did that, and he died unfortunately in Liberia when he was only 24. I unfortunately didn't get to travel or set up my own ministry either. Although I graduated from Amherst College, I died at Andover Theological Seminary, September 1st, 1835, when I was only 28.
Hello, my name is Sardis Chapman.
Hello.
I was born in 1803 here in Massachusetts. In 1827, I built my house for me and my first wife. That house later became part of the Underground Railroad, and after I died, Sojourner Truth lived in it for a short period of time. My first wife, Dolly, and I had a few kids. Only one of them made it past the age of 16. Her name was Harriet, and she ended up becoming very important in the town of Southampton. After my first wife died, I married Sarah, and after Sarah died, I married Hannah, and I loved them all very much, though they did die. I owned a small shoe shop where I repaired and made shoes, and my house and the shoe shop are still standing now and are both part of the Southampton Historical Society. Me and my daughter Harriet, in the later years of our life, became very interested in the genealogies and histories of the people of Southampton. We studied the grave sites, we studied the family trees, and we ended up finding out a lot of useful information for the town of Southampton. And before we died, we donated $1,000 to the town of Southampton to build the wrought iron fence around the cemetery.
Everybody,
So,
how are you? I'm Nathaniel Searle I, and I was born May 3rd, 1686 in Northampton, Massachusetts. I died June 26, in 1777 at the age of 91 years right here in Southampton. I'm a third-generation American. My grandfather John emigrated from Warwick, England in 1634 with two brothers. They arrived in Boston, and from there they traveled further west with several other English immigrants, where they founded the new colony of Springfield. He became the first constable and surveyor of the town. He was of poor health, and he died at the age of 31 years, only 6 months after the birth of his only child, my father, John Jr., who was born in 1641. His death was the first on record in the settlement of Springfield. His wife, my grandmother, Sarah Baldwin, remarried Alexander Edwards, a Welshman, soon afterward. It is said that all of the Edwards and Searles in the Connecticut River Valley are descended from her. My father, John Jr., was born in Springfield, and as a child, he moved to Northampton with his family, his mother, stepfather, and 8 younger half-siblings. At the time, Northampton was called Norwottuck, or Nonotuck, meaning the midst of the river in the Pocumtuck native language. Their family were some of the first settlers there. My oldest brother, John III, was killed in 1704 with 3 of his young children in an Indian raid in Pascomic, the old name for Easthampton. One of his children was carried off to Canada with the Indians, and he lived with them for many years before returning to Easthampton as a young adult. There's actually a stone commemorating that spot on East Street, at the beginning of East Street in Easthampton, right after you come off of Route 5, right near to the bike path. I had another brother before him, also named John, who died at 12 days old. In all, I had 4 half-siblings from my father's first marriage, of whom only John III lived past infancy, and was myself the 6th of 7 children from his second marriage to my mother, Mary North. I was one of the first settlers in Southampton. The first permanent settlement in what is now Southampton was established in 1730, when a group of 30 Northampton men were each granted 90 acres to farm, to work, and live on. In 1741, this became the 2nd precinct of Northampton. It was named New Hampton. And in 1753, the General Court declared the precinct to be a district, and the name was changed to Southampton. I had the first 2-room house in Southampton, located on High Street, somewhere between Clark Street and the Fulmer Road, somewhere to the west of that. We had no church building in town for many years, so when the visiting ministers from out of town would visit, they would always stay with my family, since with 2 rooms, we had the largest house in town at the time. I was the 2nd signer of our church charter, right after the Reverend Jonathan Judd, who you just met. He preached here most of his life, and he achieved considerable fame. I was also a moderator, a selectman, church deacon, and ensign in the militia. I was wealthy for my day and influential in town and church affairs. I had 12 children, 3 daughters and 9 sons. I had 2 wives. All of my children were born of my first wife, Priscilla Webb, with 24 years separating the eldest to the youngest. Priscilla's family also came from Warwickshire, England. Her great-great-grandfather, Alexander Webb Jr., came to Boston in 1629 with his family from Stratford-upon-Avon, and he happened to be a first cousin of William Shakespeare. After Priscilla died in 1746, I married my second wife, Sarah Williams, who we believe was from Hartford. I also outlived her by 16 years. I bought large tracts of land and set up several of my sons with farms in town here and also beyond, including Aaron Searle on Valley Road, Bildad and Gideon Searle on Pleasant Street, Stephen Searle on Fulmer Road, The site where Jenny Ganesik's farm is now on Gilbert Road at the present time, and Zophar Searle, whose farm is still intact and still active on Alder Meadow at the base of Wolf Hill, which is where I live. I lived to be 91 years old, and when I died, the funeral procession from the First Congregational Church up the hill to the center cemetery, 6 of my grandsons were pallbearers. Along the procession, a bolt of lightning struck a ledge on the side of the road. Fragments of the rock struck several of the attendees, including 2 of my grandsons, carrying my coffin. They were seriously injured. For the next couple of 100 years, the split rock could still be seen on the hill of the road leading up to this cemetery. All of my 12 children married, and all except for 1 had many children themselves. So eventually I had 115 grandchildren.
Whoa.
115, and there were 45 years separating the youngest to the oldest. I've been considered by several historians since to be the Jacob or Abraham of my generation, the patriarch of my family. One last footnote. This is me talking more personally. 300 years after the first Nathaniel was born, well, I'll get back in character. One last footnote. After I was born, my great-great-great-great-great, that's 6 greats, grandson was born. His name was Nathaniel Edward Searle, named after me and his grandfather, Edward Cornelius Searle Jr. He's 35 years old right now. He and his family live in Boston, and his own son, Colin, makes him my great-grandson times 7 generations. And I could list the names if you like. There's me, Nathaniel the First, my son Zophar, who settled off of Russellville Road. Then there's Cornelius Edward, Orlando, Edward Cornelius Sr., Edward Cornelius Jr., Barry, that's me, Nathaniel, my son, and then Colin, his son. So that's our story.
Thank you. That's good.
Thank you.
My name is Reverend Jonathan Judd. I was born in Waterbury, Connecticut in 1719. I went to Yale College and graduated in 1741. I went to Suffield, Connecticut to preach for 2 years. At that time, a committee from Southampton, what was known as New Hampton then, came and invited me to preach here for 3 months. The reason they invited me to preach for 3 months was because at that time a settlement, in order to become a town, had to have a settled pastor of the church. I arrived in Southampton in February of 1743. I had a wonderful thing happen that day. The Reverend Jonathan Edwards of Northampton met me in Westfield and escorted me the rest of the way to Southampton. I preached for 3 months, and in April of that year, the committee met and invited me to be their settled pastor. They gave me 200 acres of land. They gave me money. They built a pulpit for me in the meeting house, and they provided me with all the firewood that I could use. In August of that year, I started to build my own house with the help of the townspeople. With the help of the townspeople. That house stands today on Maple Street where Mr. William Gray lives. In November of that year, I went back to Suffield and I married my sweetheart, Silent Sheldon. I came back, finished my house, and in December I went to Silent's home. When she arrived here, she had 3 first cousins, Israel, Noah, and Stephen Sheldon, all of whom were among the original settlers. Silence was a wonderful creature. She exhibited industrious habits and excellent house work. In 1748, there was an Indian uprising in Southfield. Many of the original settlers took their families and fled to Northampton. I took my family and went back to Southampton. In December of that year, we returned to Southampton. In 1753, we built our first meeting house, which today is called a church. Silence and I had 7 children, and I'm proud to say that we all survived to adulthood. Jonathan Jr. started the first store in town. It stands today at 5 East Street. Sylvester's son eventually became the owner and the editor of the Daily Hampshire Gazette. In 1783, my beloved Silence passed into the arms of the Heavenly Father. In 1790, I married the widow of minister, Ruth Bidwell. And in April of 1803, I left this life after having served the Southampton Congregational Church for 60 years. And aside to this, I'm Charlie Fisher. My mother was Ruth Sheldon. Her fourth great-grandfather was the Bill Sheldon that I mentioned earlier, first cousin of Silence Sheldon, who was married to the Reverend Jonathan Judd. The house that Israel built at 10 Cricketite Road, I've had the privilege of calling my own home for the past 40 years. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Sylvester Woodbridge. I was born in 1754 and I was a doctor. The town of Southampton got a committee to try to find a doctor to settle with them, to be the doctor for the town, so they chose me and I accepted. So in 1776, I moved to Southampton with my wife and we built a small cottage. But because my family was wealthy, they gave me a lot of money to try to make my home nice. So it became the most expensive house of its time. The village people would admire it. I had huge parties where I invited a ton of people and there was dancing. We also held the Civil War reunion here. Next to my house there was a watermelon patch. Some of the village boys would steal my melons, so I decided to add ipecac to them, which is a drug that makes people throw up. So, because I was the doctor, they came to me for a cure, so I just told them that they'd eaten too much melon, and they never stole them again.
All set? Thank you so much, Dr. Woodbridge. So we're going to the next.
Right, hello, I'm Lydia Ann Cyril. I was born January 3rd in 1822, where I was the fourth child of 10 children. I lived with my parents until the 1850s, and then after that I lived with various siblings. In the 1890s, I was diagnosed with brain softening, or Alzheimer's as we know it today. At the time, I was living with friends Eunice Gaylord and Noah H. Clark, and I lived with them until my death on June 10, 1901. In my will, I left $1,000 or $31,000 to the Southampton Congregational Church, and then I left the rest of my money to the worthy poor of Southampton.
This concludes our tour, and we thank you so much for participating today. Please like us on Facebook, the Southampton Historical Society, and also know that we do have a new calendar that's going to be coming out, hopefully going on sale in the next week or two. And that's all photos of our town and celebrating our first responders here. So thank you again for coming, and we appreciate you supporting us. Thank you.